He looked right at me, in front of everyone, and said I was a janitor. My father, the man who used to tuck my hair behind my ear and call me Mouse, told a table of his wealthy friends that I cleaned up after people for a living. He smiled while he said it, like it was a joke, but his eyes were sharp and mean. I felt the words slam into me, like a door closing. The room blurred. I was holding a glass of water, and I remember my fingers shaking so hard the ice chimed. He knew what he was doing. He wanted to remind me who he thought I was. Small, grateful, dependent. I didn't cry there. I just swallowed it, nodded, and let my heart turn cold. I went to the restroom, stared at my own reflection, and thought, you don't get to do this to me anymore. That was the night I decided I would shut down his money. I work as a physical therapist assistant at a rehab center in Cleveland. I help people learn to walk again after strokes and car accidents. I hold trembling hands, count steps, cheer soft victories. I wipe down parallel bars and clean equipment after sessions. Yes, I clean, because people breathe and sweat and sometimes cry through their pain. It's part of care. My dad, Victor Caldwell, built a world where anything that didn't look like a boardroom didn't count as work. He called my job charity hours, like I was playing. My mother used to defend me, used to say, Vic, our daughter helps people get their lives back. She died 2 years ago. After that, he became careless with his words and even more careless with our family money. He also became very dependent on that money. What he didn't say at that dinner was that without the trust my mother set up, his fancy watch and glossy dinners would have gone away a long time ago. When Mom died, her estate plan split into 2 main parts, personal property and an irrevocable trust, designed to protect the family's assets and make sure her wishes were followed. By her design, the trust has a corporate trustee, Broadstone Trust Bank, and one family co-trustee. She chose me. It wasn't because I was the oldest only, though that was part of it. It was because my mother called me careful. I read the fine print. I don't scare easy. The trust had a clause I learned by heart. Distributions were to be made for health, education, maintenance, and support. HEMS, as the lawyer said, with the corporate trustee holding discretion, taking guidance from the family co-trustee. Dad wasn't cut off. He had an allowance. But he couldn't use trust funds for speculative ventures or gifts to partners. There were controls, and they were there for a reason. The first time I saw an invoice to Bramwell Consulting LLC for $14,800 from the trust account, I thought it was a mistake. The second time, I knew it wasn't. There were also hotel charges and hospitality invoices that made my stomach twist. The night he called me a janitor, I'd already asked him about those payments twice. The first time he laughed and said, "You wouldn't understand these things, Nora. It's how deals get done." The second time, he turned hard and told me to sign a distribution request without reading it. When I refused, he leaned in close and murmured, "You want to keep those sweet little shifts of yours? Stay in your lane and do what I tell you." That night, after his joke at my expense, he took it further. He put his arm around my shoulders in the parking lot and said, "Mouse, we need to process the next transfer Monday morning. Don't be dramatic. It's only money." I stepped away from his hand, stood under the streetlight, and told him I wasn't approving anything tied to Bramwell Consulting or any consultants I couldn't verify. He smiled with his teeth and shook his head. "You really think your clipboard job gives you the right to tell me what to do?" he said. "You clean. I build." Something in me snapped. I walked to my car, shut the door, and texted Broadstone, "We need to review distributions urgently." I met with the trust officer at Broadstone the next afternoon. Her name was Jessica Tran, and she had that calm, unblinking way of listening that used to unnerve me. I liked her for it now. I laid out the invoices. "Bramwell Consulting LLC," I said, tapping the page. "What is their role?" She flipped through the documents and asked questions. Did we have a contract? Deliverables? How did their work benefit the trust? I had nothing but vague email threads from Dad. Strategic advice, deal flow introductions, relationship management. Jess talked me through my options. "We can't freeze distributions without cause," she said, "but we can request invoices, proof of services, and a compliance review. If there are red flags, we can put a temporary hold pending further documentation." She said the words fiduciary duty and protect the beneficiaries. I nodded so hard it hurt. He's already angry, I said. He called me a janitor last night. She looked up. That's cruel, she said. She slid a list of information requests toward me. Let's do this step by step. Dad responded to our first request with a flurry of charm and then a threat. He sent a list of advisory sessions with Bramwell, no dates, no details, and then left me a voicemail. Kiddo, you don't want to make an enemy out of me. Sign the damn papers. I saved it. The next day, my supervisor at the rehab center, Tanya, called me into her office. She asked if I was okay. My mouth went dry. Your father left a message for HR, she said, and I need you to listen. She pressed play. His voice walked out of the speaker, smooth and righteous. Hello, this is Victor Caldwell. I'm concerned about one of your employees, my daughter. I believe she might be taking home medical supplies and using your facility for personal business. I suggest you keep an eye on her. I felt like I was upside down. He was trying to get me fired. Tanya looked at me and said, Do you need to tell me anything? The room swam, and then everything snapped back into focus. I said no, I had never taken anything, and she knew it. She watched me for a beat and nodded. We trust you, she said. I'm documenting this as a retaliatory call. We've got you. I breathed for the first time that day. I emailed Jess the audio file. 2 days later, I was in a paneled office with a woman named Margaret O'Neill. She had been my mother's lawyer. Her gray hair was pulled back, her pen sharp. She listened to everything quietly, then opened a file drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope with my name on the front in my mother's handwriting. I stared at it like it might float away. Your mother asked me to give this to you if Victor started using the trust for anything outside of Hems, or if he made you feel unsafe, Margaret said. I slid it open with my nail. Inside was a letter that smelled faintly like my mother's closet from years ago. Clean, powdery, like cedar. My mother's words were warm and direct. Nora, if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to stand between you and your father anymore. He is brilliant and he is reckless. Please protect yourself and your brother and sister. Use the trust provisions. If he tries to charm you into breaking rules, don't. If he tries to shame you out of your better judgment, don't. You are not the janitor of his choices. You are the steward of our family. I am proud of your work. I am proud of your hands. I cried until I couldn't see the ink. Margaret slid me a box of tissues and waited. I left Margaret's office with a folder of documents. The trust's Hems clause highlighted, Mom's letter copies, and the section that allowed a temporary hold on distributions if there was suspected misuse or intimidation. Jess moved quickly, too. Broadstone sent a compliance request to Bramwell Consulting for proof of services and beneficial ownership information. We asked for copies of their contract, their EIN, W-9, all of it. In parallel, I started collecting everything Dad had sent me, texts, emails, that voicemail. I also dug through 6 months of statements and found 3 more interesting names: Harbor Suites, Blue Alder Events, and Allied Merchant Services. There were dates that lined up with a flashy launch party for a real estate project and with a beach trip he said was a few days of meetings. I highlighted them. Jess set a review meeting for Monday morning, the same morning Dad wanted the next big transfer. I didn't sleep much that weekend. I made coffee at 2 a.m., laid Mom's letter on my kitchen table, and practiced what I would say. He showed up at my apartment unannounced on Sunday. He had a paper bag of pastries like that would make me easier to bend. I didn't let him in beyond the threshold. He looked around like a landlord. You sure you're happy like this? He asked. I told him I was. He chuckled. Cute, he said. Then he leaned closer, lowering his voice. If you pull some stunt with the trust, you'll regret it. That job is not a career, Nora. It's a step. And if you want help moving up, if you want help with anything, you need to be in my good graces. I told him I didn't need help climbing anywhere. I help people stand, I said. If you won't respect that, you won't respect anything. He smiled like a cheap angel. Then stand up to me, he said softly. Let's see how far you get. I closed the door on his smirk and pressed my forehead against it until his footsteps faded. Monday morning, we held the review meeting at Broadstone. Jess was there with a compliance officer named Raoul. We made a conference call with Dad because he said he was too busy to come in. His voice filled the room like a crown. I read from my notes. We are requesting receipts, contracts, and proof of services for Bramwell Consulting LLC and additional support for hospitality and events charged to the trust. Jess added that per the trust, distributions weren't to be used for speculative investments or gifts, and consulting had to directly benefit the trust's assets, not Dad's separate company. Dad's patience thinned. "This is nonsense," he snapped. "I've never been questioned like this." Raoul, who barely looked up from the file, said, "This is not a question, Mr. Caldwell. It's a standard request, and because the family co-trustee has raised concerns about intimidation, we are placing a temporary hold on non-HEMS distributions until documentation is complete." There was silence. Then Dad laughed, short and ugly. "You think you can freeze me? You're a janitor with a clipboard," he said. I looked Jess in the eye and said, "That will be recorded as intimidation." He didn't realize how often his life leaned on the trust until it wasn't there. The hold meant the corporate trustee would still pay for basic health insurance, the taxes related to the trust, and some maintenance of the property that the trust owned, a lake cottage my mother loved. But it also meant his monthly advisory stipend, and all discretionary draws tied to his deals were paused. It meant the Amex connected to the trust got restricted too, because we couldn't validate the charges. Jessica's team reached out to Bramwell. 3 days passed with no contract, no deliverables, just a single-page scope of work typed without a letterhead, and an address that turned out to be a mailbox at a pack-and-ship store. I Googled Bramwell and found a LinkedIn page with a logo that looked like it had been built in a hurry. Their CEO was a woman named Leah. She was pretty, poised, with a bio that said strategic introductions and brand elevation. My stomach sank. I'd seen Leah's name on an authorized user form for the trust's Amex that Dad had sent me for routine updates a month ago. He'd snuck her onto the card and dared me to notice. I sent that to Jess. She called me within 5 minutes. "That's a violation," she said. "We're tightening everything." On Thursday night, Dad hosted a launch event for a building he'd been trying to bring to life for a year. He'd planned to impress investors with renderings and cocktails. It was at a glossy event space downtown, Blue Alder. The trust's Amex was supposed to cover it. He walked in with his silk pocket square and that faked generous laugh, and he tried to sign for the first delivery. The card declined. He tried again. Declined. He called the number on the back of the card. He raised his voice. People started whispering. Leah put a hand on his arm and whispered something. He fumbled for his personal card. It didn't go through either because he'd been floating those balances on the trust's payments for months. He went white around the mouth. I wasn't there, but his CFO, Malik, called me later and told me about it, his voice low. "He's spiraling, Nora," Malik said. He told the room that a bank made a mistake, but people saw. Some left. Investors left. I didn't gloat. I sat on the edge of my bed and watched the city's lights blink on and off. I felt the revenge like a calm tide, doing what it should. The next day, he stormed into the rehab center in a blazer, bringing a wave of cologne and anger. You don't do that at a medical facility, but he did. He leaned on the reception desk and asked for me by name. Our receptionist paged me with tight eyes. I stepped into the lobby in my scrubs, hair pulled back, badge visible. He looked me up and down and smiled like I was wearing a costume. "You embarrassed me," he said, stepping close. "You have no idea what you've done." Patients and families watched. I kept my voice low. "You can't be here," I said. "This is patient space. You need to leave." He laughed. "While you're wiping down rails, I'm building real things." A patient in a wheelchair glanced from him to me. Something like shame crossed my dad's face for a heartbeat. He pointed at me and said, "This is your last chance." I hit the duress button under the desk with my knee, and 2 of our security staff appeared like they always do, calm and kind. "Sir, you have to leave," one said. He huffed and flicked an imaginary speck off his lapel. "This isn't over," he said, then turned and left. I stood in the little back hallway and shook hard, not because I was scared of him physically, but because the child in me wanted him to be a father again, and he wasn't. That evening, I wrote him an email with the subject line, boundaries and next steps. I copied Jess and Margaret. I stated that he was not to come to my workplace again. I reminded him of the trust's terms and the hold on distributions pending review. I included the audio of his voicemail to my boss as evidence of retaliation and intimidation. And I laid out what he needed to do: provide contracts, invoices, and deliverables for Bramwell and any hospitality spend, remove unauthorized users from the trust card, stop using trust funds as bridge financing for his deals. I sent it, and then sat in my dark kitchen with a mug of tea cooling between my hands. My phone buzzed. My sister Lena texted, "Dad says you froze him. Is that true? Did you cut him off?" A minute later, my brother Evan wrote, "He says you're punishing him because you're jealous." I closed my eyes. Then I asked them to come to my apartment Sunday. I told them I would show them everything. We sat at my small table, the three of us, with Jess on a laptop screen. I laid out the printouts. Lena's mouth tightened when she saw the authorized user form with Leah's name. "I thought that woman he's been posting with was just a friend," she said. I flipped to the invoice for Blue Alder events and the charges at Harbor Suites. Evan put his head in his hands. Jess explained the HEM standard and what qualified. She showed how Bramwell had no valid contract in our file, how the transfer requests were rushed, how Dad had pressured me. I played the voicemail he left for my boss. When it ended, Lena wiped her cheek. Evan stared at the table like it might give him an answer. "He's our dad," he said. "He raised us." I swallowed. "He raised us with Mom," I said. "She trusted us to protect this." Lena nodded slowly. "I'm in," she said. "Do what you have to do." Evan looked up, a little boy and a tired man both in his eyes. "Okay," he said. "I'll back you." I felt something release in my chest, like a knot finally loosening. I met with Margaret the next day to discuss removing Dad as a special advisor to the trust, a role my mother had given him as a courtesy so he could provide input on investments related to real estate. That role had a removal clause. If he acted against the trust's best interests or used his position to intimidate, the corporate trustee could suspend, and the family co-trustee could request removal. We started the process. Margaret drafted a formal letter citing misuse and intimidation. Jess sent notices to the banks connected to the trust to flag any unusual activity. It felt dramatic and cold, and then I found more. In Dad's emails, I saw a thread where he described moving some trust-owed debts off paper by issuing consulting fees to Bramwell. He was hiding expenses by calling them advice. I also found a signed authorization he had tried to slide past me with a stack of renewal forms, where he added Leah as an authorized user on the trust card. He had scribbled a note, "Routine updates," to disguise it. I remembered the day he'd dropped those forms in my lap with his "Love you, kiddo" act. Rage warmed my face. I forwarded everything to Jess. I decided to meet Leah. I found the address listed on Bramwell's website and took a bus after work. It was a storefront with frosted glass and a gold vinyl sign. Inside, a receptionist sat behind a white desk, and a woman who looked exactly like her photo, Leah Bramwell, emerged from a back room in heels and a blazer. She looked surprised when I introduced myself. "Oh," she said, "Victor's daughter." I told her I wanted to understand what Bramwell did for the trust. She smiled with a shade of pity. "We do introductions, branding, that kind of thing," she said. "We help position assets in the right circles." I asked for a contract and deliverables. She said everything was informal. She glanced at my shoes, at my simple bag, and seemed to decide I didn't matter. An older woman came out from the back and asked Leah about a payment for a lease. Leah sighed and said, "I told Victor the trust would handle it." She saw my face and quickly added, "I mean, it was supposed to." I left with my heart thudding. He wasn't just buying champagne with the trust. He was building her business on our backs. I texted Jess from the sidewalk. "I have more," I wrote, "and a witness." That week, Ken Addison, a local investor and one-time friend of my father's, called me. He said he was done waiting for Victor's promised capital. He said he'd seen the Blue Alder fiasco. He forwarded me an email where my father justified a delayed investor distribution by writing, "Funds are tied up in family trust. Expect release when internal dust settles." That phrase, internal dust settles, made me see red. He blamed me to his investors, like this was petty drama, not protection against misuse. Ken also mentioned casually that years ago, my father had dipped into my college fund when cash was tight, then put it back later. I felt a sharp, old ache. I remembered a confusing sophomore year, when I had to switch schools because my financial aid package changed. I dug through my own old files and found a statement from my 529 plan with a withdrawal labeled Temporary Family Needs. I had always assumed Mom signed off on that. Maybe she did, and they replaced it. I'll never know. But reading it now, I felt the old betrayal and a new clarity. This pattern was long. The removal meeting with Broadstone happened on a Thursday morning. We sat in a glass-walled conference room, me, Jessica, a senior trustee, Margaret, and on the other side, my father with his lawyer. He wore a navy suit and a mask of calm. He said Bramwell was legitimate and that strategic introductions were essential. He said I was emotional. Margaret spoke in a voice like steel. She read copies of the invoices with missing deliverables. Jess played the voicemail he left me about signing papers. I slid across the audio file where he told my employer I was stealing. He flushed and sputtered that it was a misunderstanding. Then I put my mother's letter on the table. She asked me to do this, I said. She trusted me to slow you down. He looked at the letter like it was a snake. The senior trustee, a man named Douglas, cleared his throat. Per our responsibilities, he said. We are suspending Mr. Caldwell as special advisor effective immediately, pending a full review. The hold on non-HEMS distributions remains. Any and all charges appearing to benefit third parties not directly tied to the trust will be rejected. The trust card authorizations are revoked except for the administrator. My father's lawyer wanted to argue, but the documents spoke. The truth revealed itself in black and white. Afterward, walking out into the autumn air, I felt shaky and tall at the same time. I had done the right thing, but when I got home and sat on my couch, the house felt too quiet. He texted me that night, a salvo of insults and then a line that cut deep. You will die miserable and alone with your mop. I put my phone face down and cried into a pillow until I fell asleep. The next morning, I went to therapy, something I'd started after Mom died and then stopped when life got busy. I went back and told my therapist everything. We talked about loops, the old ways he baited me, the old ways I tried to please. We talked about grief inside anger, and how betrayals often start small. We set small goals: sleep more, eat properly, keep the boundary. It felt almost too simple. But simple things are a kind of armor. Meanwhile, the freeze did what it was meant to do. Without the trust's steady cash, Dad's project stumbled. Contractors demanded deposits. Investors asked questions he couldn't answer. He sold a car I'd loved since I was a teenager, the cherry red one he'd polished every Sunday. He downgraded his office lease. Malik, his CFO, emailed me to say he was looking for other work. Dad released a statement blaming unexpected banking procedures. The local business gossip sites ran soft pieces about leadership and liquidity. A photo from the Blue Alder event showed him standing with his hands open like a politician, Leah next to him nursing a tight smile. I didn't celebrate. It was like watching a levee break. People got wet who didn't deserve it. But I told myself, again and again, the trust wasn't a plaything. It was a promise. Then Leah filed a lawsuit against him, alleging breach of contract and defamation. My friend who worked at the courthouse texted me a screenshot. The complaint mentioned promised funding via a family trust and unauthorized charge reversal. It wasn't a criminal case, but it was public and embarrassing. A week later, Leah showed up at my apartment door, eyes puffy, an envelope in her hand. I didn't want to let her in, but she started talking fast in the hallway about how she didn't know, how he'd promised, how she was just trying to get a business off the ground. I felt like I was looking at a version of myself at 22, wanting to believe someone's confidence could cover your bills. You can leave your statement with Jessica at Broadstone, I said, and gave her Jess's card. She nodded and pressed the envelope into my palm anyway. Inside were printed emails where my father wrote about charging Leah's business rent to the trust as consulting overhead, and how I wouldn't catch it. He had underestimated me again. I sent every page to Jess. There was a pause after that, a heavy week where nothing moved but my nervous system. I worked my shifts, moved legs and arms, wiped down equipment, and reminded people how strong they were. My patients didn't care about trusts or consultants. They cared about standing without falling, about buttoning a shirt with a numb hand. It recalibrated me. Every time I wanted to collapse, I thought about Mr. Jensen taking his first step around the bars and crying into my shoulder. My boss, Tanya, gave me more hours and said she was proud of me. On a Thursday afternoon, a woman in a business suit came in with a bouquet. "For Nora," she said. It was from Jessica, white lilies and a card that said, "Thank you for doing the hard thing." I put them by the staff coffee pot and watched them open over days, soft and deliberate. Dad finally called, not to shout, but with a ragged voice. "I need help," he said. "Can we meet?" We sat at a diner off the freeway where the coffee is strong and the pancakes come in stacks like comfort. He looked older, the silver at his temples less sharp. "They're calling my notes," he said. "I'm 2 months behind on the townhome project. I'll lose the deposit if the draw doesn't come in." He held his hands out like an offering. "You made your point," he said. My fork paused over eggs. "No," I said softly. "The point isn't to hurt you. The point is to stop you from hurting us." He swore quietly, the way he does when he thinks he's not being heard. "What do you want?" he asked. I took a breath. I had thought about this, written it out, read it to my therapist. "I want you to sign a repayment plan for everything you took from the trust that wasn't Hems. I want you to send a written apology to my workplace for your call. I want you to remove Leah and any other third party from any account connected to us. I want you to step down from your role as advisor to the trust permanently. And I want you to volunteer at my rehab center for 20 hours, not to pay down anything, but so you can watch how people stand up. Then, and only then, I will ask Broadstone to approve a limited Hems distribution for your housing costs so you don't lose your home." He stared like I had slapped him. "You're humiliating me," he said. I sipped coffee. "You humiliated yourself," I said. "I'm putting it in writing." He didn't take it well. He called me a petty tyrant. He walked out and left me with the bill. I paid, left a good tip, and got on with my day. He called twice more that week and didn't leave a message. Then I got an email from Margaret with a scanned copy of an agreement signed by my father, a repayment schedule over 3 years, a letter of apology drafted and ready, a resignation from the advisor role, and an acknowledgement of a voluntary service arrangement at the rehab. I read the signature, the little loop he does on the V of Victor, and felt my shoulders drop an inch. He wasn't sorry, not really, not yet, but he could read a balance sheet. He knew I wasn't moving. He showed up at the rehab on a Wednesday afternoon wearing a plain sweater and jeans, looking less like a prince. He stood uncertainly at the edge of the gym while I helped a woman named Valerie stand from a chair without pushing off her thighs. After 5 tries, she did it, and we high-fived like teenagers. My father watched me kneel and tie her shoe because her fingers were still clumsy. He watched me wipe sweat from her forehead and make a joke about winning a marathon. He watched Valerie cry when she took 3 steps with the walker. He watched me squeeze her hand and say, "You did that. You did it." Later, he sat at a table folding towels. He didn't do it well, but he did it. I saw him look around at all the people working so hard. No one cared who he was. No one needed his charm. They just needed a steady presence. He looked smaller and, for the first time in a long time, human. A week later, an envelope arrived at my boss's office with his handwritten apology. Tanya read it and then called me in. "It's not flowery," she said. "It doesn't need to be. It's clear." It said he had lied, that he was angry, that he was sorry. It said he respected the work we did. She looked up at me, and we both laughed unexpectedly. "He said respect," she said. "It's a small word, but it landed big." I forwarded the signed repayment plan and the resignation letter to Jessica, along with a request to release a limited Hems distribution for his rent for the next 3 months, contingent on continued compliance. She approved it with a note, temporary and conditional. I sent my father one line. Approved as discussed. Life didn't become a fairy tale. Leah dropped her lawsuit after a confidential settlement, probably nothing like what she expected. Dad's development project didn't recover. He sold the rights and paid back who he could. He moved to a smaller place. He stopped wearing the watch. He started coming to the rehab on Wednesdays for a while, even after his service hours were technically over. The first time a patient hugged him, he tensed like someone had thrown a punch, and then he softened. He told me one afternoon, in a voice careful like a child's, that he didn't know who to be if he wasn't the biggest man in the room. I told him, "Try being honest." He nodded, and maybe it stuck. I still watched him. I still checked statements. I still read everything twice, but some of the ice in my chest melted. I got promoted to senior therapist assistant around that time. It wasn't glamorous. It meant more paperwork and more ankle braces and a small bump in pay, but it came with a quiet victory. A little office with a window that looked out on a maple that went fire red in October. I bought a better pair of walking shoes and a used car that didn't rattle when it hit a pothole. Lena came over more. Evan started a business fixing bikes and sent me photos of oil-blackened hands and smiles. We had dinners where we talked about food and movies instead of money and loans. We started to feel like a family that could stretch without breaking. I don't forgive easily. I also don't forget. My father will probably always have a piece of him that wants to look down on what he doesn't understand. That pride is carved deep. But he doesn't say janitor anymore. On the day the trust's board voted formally to remove him as a special advisor and confirm the new compliance procedures I'd helped write, he stood up at the end of the meeting and said, "I was wrong." He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the table. And that was enough for that moment. Later, in the parking lot, he turned to me and said, "You were right to shut me down." I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time when I looked at him. Safety, the sense that the ground wouldn't shift under my feet every time he got an idea. I said, "I didn't shut you down. I shut down the mess. You have a chance to build something real." Sometimes I replay that night at the club, the laugh, the word he used. I can still taste the bitterness. And then I picture the day I clicked send on the freeze request. The day I stood up in the Broadstone conference room with my mother's letter in my hand. That was the real turn. Revenge was never about hurting him back with a better insult or cutting him off at the knees. Revenge, for me, was exposing the truth, making him play by rules he thought applied to everyone else but him. It was about patience and paperwork and a backbone that didn't waver when he pushed. It was about taking that word, janitor, and owning it. Yes, I cleaned. I cleaned up the financial chaos he left behind. I shut down his funding cold, not out of spite, but out of love for my mother's memory, my siblings' future, and the people I serve every day who know what work really is. Justice isn't fireworks, it's receipts and signatures and a quiet night's sleep. I have that now. And when I walk the therapy gym and hear the click of canes and the soft rhythm of breath, I feel proud, not small. My father asked me once, months later, if I would ever let him back in. I told him he was never out. He just had to enter through the front door like everyone else and show his hands. He nodded and said, finally, "Mouse, I'm proud of your work." I believed him. That was the real return on investment.